Maybe don't know.
This time, this time, this time, this time, this time to build. This time to build. This time to build. This time, this time to build. This time to build. This time to build. This time, power, power. This time to build power. This time to build power. This time to build power.
What's up, everybody? I'm your host, Chris Hampton.
And this is Nate Drolet.
And together we form Idea and Abilities. Any clue? Do you know?
Not a bit.
They are a former Minneapolis rap group signed to Rhymesayers, early Rhymesayers. Idea passed away several years ago. But based on their names, Idea and Abilities, who would you be?
Abilities.
The look on your face when you just said that. I can accept that. I'll be Idea. We are sitting here in my sunroom again in Lander. I don't know why we chose the warmest possible place to sit right now.
I don't know. I was thinking that as well. And then we closed the door to really seal ourselves off.
Yeah, but we did. So sitting here, Nate is about to head back to Rifle because Rifle has this strange draw on people that keeps them coming back there. So we're just trying to wrap some things up before Nate heads back. And we decided to try and knock out 2 board meetings tonight. One is going to be fun. One is going to be nuts and bolts. And Nate decided fun first.
Yes. Dessert first.
Dessert first, he says.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk a little bit about being a product of your environment. And this was your topic,
yes.
I believe. And I think it's a good one. I think it's interesting. What prompted the idea to talk about this?
Actually, it kind of stemmed back. I remembered a conversation I had while we were in Akron, Ohio, at is it the Rock Mill gym?
Yeah.
We were there.
Wow, that was like our first workshop.
Yeah, it was one of the very first ones.
Yeah, shout out Rock Mill.
But so we were doing the clinic, and it's it's a bouldering only gym. But we were doing the open session where people can walk up, ask us questions. So this one guy, we start talking back and forth. I watch him climb, and he'd only been climbing maybe a year or so, and was climbing fairly well. And at one point, he kind of pulls me aside, and he's like, "Hey, Nate," he's like, "Do you think I could ever climb 513?" And I mean, he had, I watched him do 2 V6s.
Yeah,
I was like,
I remember this guy.
Yeah, I was like, yeah. I was like, hell, you get a little fitness, you could do it in a month.
Right.
And he was just like, really? I was like, yeah, totally. He was like, well, I've only ever met 2 people who've ever climbed 513, and they're really strong.
Right.
So this for him was a life goal. And it was one of those things where I was just like, man, if you lived around people who only climbed 513, you'd be like, oh, cool. Yeah, I'll just go ahead and climb 513 right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's funny. I hadn't really thought about it in the context of this conversation, but when I started trad climbing, the idea was that was not a pun, by the way. I'm Idea, your abilities. The idea was that
I completely missed it.
I almost did too. The idea was that 512 trad was really, really hard.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I believed. And 511 seemed like this barely attainable goal, and it took this huge mind shift to climb harder. And then it was the same thing when I started sport climbing. There weren't any climbers in Cincinnati at the time climbing 514. There were a couple who had done it, but no one at the time was doing it. So it just seemed like this crazy hard thing. And I got through 513 really quickly because I had a few friends who were doing it. Mm-hmm. So I just believed I could. Then I definitely slowed to a crawl after that because I just didn't have many people climbing at that grade.
Yeah. Yeah, it's much easier to copy other people. Like if you can see if everyone else around you is doing it, then you're like, well, okay, like, this won't, like, oh, I guess I'll just do this too. Like it doesn't occur to you that it will be a challenge if everyone else can do it.
Right.
So yeah, that kind of is what prompted it, was thinking back on this conversation and really just thinking like, if this guy could have like a different perspective of, or even just like realize that it's like, yeah, he's way better off than he even thinks he is.
Yeah.
It's like, he could easily achieve his goal and then shoot beyond it.
Yeah. And I think that kind of leads into one of the, the first things that we decided was a component of this environment that sort of dictates who you become as a climber to some degree, is that the people you climb with play a gigantic part in it, in all sorts of ways, in your belief in what's possible and just in the idea that you get to watch it be done just makes it that much easier for you to learn.
Yeah.
Yeah. Even beyond just believing it.
Mm-hmm. No, totally.
In fact, I would say, having known you relatively early on when you moved to the Southeast, and then watching you kind of make pretty big leaps when you were climbing regularly with Jimmy Webb, Brian Bogus, Brad Weaver, that crew, I think that's a large part of it. You got to
totally.
go out and climb with those guys.
Yeah. I mean, if all your friends flash V10, then you're like, well, it can't be that hard.
Right.
Hey guys, let me just try this for like 10 minutes real quick before we walk on. But yeah, I mean, that was like huge, like being able to, just see that. I mean, that was just it too. It wasn't like those guys weren't just like mutants. I never saw them as something just extraordinary or unbelievable. They just all had really great work ethic and like they really believed in themselves. And I mean, yeah, they never had a doubt that they would climb well.
Yeah, you got to see the behind the scenes of it. And I think that's what a lot of people miss when they just see these climbers in the magazines or in the videos or whatever. They see the big send. It seems like magic. You got to see the work that got put in and all the things that contribute to them climbing well.
Yeah. Yeah, it was cool. It definitely like shaped a lot of my climbing. I mean, especially like with all three of those guys, and I mean, so many others like Nate John, Rami Anab, like, I mean, just so many other guys that I've been able to climb around that have been amazing. But yeah, for me, that was huge.
Yeah, and I think it can go the other way just as easily.
Totally.
Like this whole topic came from a guy who'd only seen two other people climb 513, but he at least had the audacity to ask, do you think I can do this? Because he'd met two people who had. What if you're in an area where no one's ever climbed 513? How do you begin to believe it?
It's hard. I mean, it's, there are like the very rare cases of people who come out, guys like James Litz, who, the people who really jump ahead of everyone else.
Mm-hmm. James Litz is the Rodney Mullen of climbing. I hadn't thought about that till you just said that.
I thought Dave Graham was a Rodney Mullen.
No, Dave, no.
They're both kind of
James
wizard.
Litz.
Okay.
I like James Litz better.
For this. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because Dave had a whole crew around him.
That is true.
Yeah. Rodney was solo. James is solo.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult, like, because it is very much a game of perception. Like, if you don't believe that you can do something, it'll never happen. Like, it's this whole idea of like a growth mindset.
Yep.
Like, and I think that's, it's funny. I think for me, like, for a long time, like, I guess I always believed, like, I was like, yeah, of course I'm just going to climb V11. Like, because it was to the point to where everyone around me I ever knew pretty much had climbed V11. And once I got there, I was just like, oh, like, I don't know. Like, I feel like without realizing it, I had put a barrier between myself and like what was beyond that.
Right.
And it took me a long time to start to like believe that I could climb harder, which is like a funny thing to think about, because it's just like, well, you just get better and stronger and you're going to climb harder. But I don't know, it just didn't quite work that way for me.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, it does seem like it should be this exact correlation, but it really just isn't. Looking back, I think I've probably been strong enough to climb V11 for quite some time. Mm-hmm. It's just never been something that I really put that much belief into, enough belief that I would actually go out and put time and effort into it, into the actual climbing of a V11. I put tons of effort into getting strong enough, but never believed that I had gotten to that level per se. So never went out and actually tried the thing.
Yeah. No, it's a huge thing. Like, I remember, I think this was maybe 3 summers ago, something like that. I was climbing with Alex Steiger, who is a climbing coach in Colorado. And I was climbing with her in Rocky Mountain National Park a bunch. And at that point that year, I had already climbed 10 V11s. And she was just like, Nate, how many V12s have you done? I was like, God, I haven't climbed V12 yet. She was like, what are you doing? I was like, what do you mean? I was like, V12's hard. And she was just like, you just need to go do one. Like, you need to go confidently try one because you're going to do one. And it took me a long time. Like, I was just like, no, you're crazy. But it was actually like her saying that later on that year, like that winter, I was like, okay, I'm going to try one. And I went out to try the shield and almost did it like in my very first session, and did it, shortly thereafter, within the next week.
Yeah.
But it was
I think that's big. Having someone who, even if they're not someone who's just being an example of it constantly, having someone who believes in you to that point, who you, even if you don't believe them at first, will eventually sink in and you go, I don't know, maybe they know something I don't, I think that's important to have. You've said it to me multiple times. I think you would do really well on this, or I think you would really like this. And I'm like, I hadn't even considered that I might do well on something like that. Like, I have the things I know that I do well, and that wasn't one that I had ever even thought about. And then I try it and I'm like, oh, maybe I can do this, So I think that's super important.
Yeah.
You gotta keep those people around you.
And also, just one more example, like I was telling you, I was reading Jonathan Siegrist's blog about doing the bleeding. And he said he went out to Mill Creek, was super intimidated because everything seemed sandbagged and heinous. And he was like, I don't know, maybe I won't even try it this weekend while I'm here. And then the person he was climbing with was just like, pretty much just like peer pressured him into it. It was like, no, like, you're going to get on this. He ended up doing it like third go.
Right.
But it's like, someone even like Jonathan Siegrist,
yep,
like, still has these same kind of feelings.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's really big. I think Jonathan Siegrist is an interesting segue into this next topic, because he's kind of an old school climber who grew up in the new school era. And I think that's benefited him in a lot of ways. And what we're going to talk about is the era that you come up in or grow up in or do most of your climbing in. I think really does quite a bit to dictate your climbing style and what you believe you can do, and the places you go to climb and what you're intimidated by, all of this.
Oh yeah.
I came up, oddly, actually, I came up in an era when bouldering and sport climbing were starting to get popular. And because I have this like
hatred,
it wasn't a hatred yet. It didn't start as a hatred. It started as like this strange belief that the older school knew better. Then I just like blocked out bouldering and sport climbing and was like, track climbing is way cooler, specifically off-width climbing, because no one likes it, And I didn't realize that there are a lot of smart people out there who didn't like it for a reason. But the fact is, coming up trad climbing, really wanting to be a good trad climber, totally dictated my style of climbing for a long time.
Yeah.
You know, it was very much like 3 points on at all times. You know, very rarely do you break that rule. The best looking movement is slow and controlled.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Chris Sharma wasn't around yet, so of course we didn't know about jumping. Chris Sharma was the very first person to jump ever.
I don't think anyone did it before him.
no one ever had. So that totally dictated, you know, the type of climbing I did. And it's very easy, and I've had this argument 1,000 times, but it's very easy to think that today's climbers, for them to think that trad climbing is so much harder than sport climbing. And I just disagree completely. I think it's the other way around, actually. Being relatively well-versed in both, I think it's the other way around. Because I've seen traddies, you know, the guys that did a lot to teach me, go get on sport climbs well below the grade they're climbing in trad and just get wrecked because they don't have the skills to sport climb. They don't train in a gym every day, you know, so it just totally dictated the way that I climbed. Sport climbing was really hard, especially having to be dynamic, and that's just the way I learned to do it, even though I learned in a bouldering gym for the most part.
Yeah, it's funny. Yeah, no, I think there's a lot that comes with the era that you started climbing. Everything from like what was popular at the time, you know, what your ethics were, things along.
What kind of tights you wore?
Kind of tights you wore.
They're leggings now.
To even just like the speed at which you approach climbing. Like, so this is one thing that kind of like grinds my gears, is that people still like, when someone's trying to get into sport climbing, people will be like, oh, you know, you need to top rope for a really long time first.
Right.
It's like, no, that is the worst thing you can do. Like, so I was climbing at the Red, and a buddy of mine came down from Canada. He had bouldered a handful of days with me back in high school, but never really climbed otherwise. And took him out to the Shire. I let up a 5.7. He followed it after me. By follow, I mean I pulled the rope and he led it because I didn't tell him anything else. I was like, okay, here's what you do. And like, he's a doctor. He's smart. He handled it. I was like, this is how you clip. I didn't show him what back clipping or Z clipping was, because I was like, in my mind, he's only going to learn the one right way. Mm-hmm. It's like, you're just going to go up, you're going to clip, you come back down. And then I just like went back up and cleaned it for him. But yeah, that day did a 7, an 8, a 9, almost did the 10. And what was funny is a bunch of med students were out on their like spring break. So they come over and he's on the 10 and just pumped out of his mind. Of course, it's like basically his first day rock climbing. He's now 4 pitches in,
right,
up on a 5.10.
Yeah.
And leading all of them because he doesn't know any better. And he is a great friend like me. And so he's up there and he's like, tries to reach up and clip way above his head. And I was like, Matt, it's going to be way easier if you just get it next to your hip. He's like, okay. Once again, blind trust. So gets up and now he's on a huge jug. It's bolts unclipped at his hip and he just can't do anything. He's like, what should I do? And he's way off the ground. I was like, yeah, just go for the next move. I'll catch you. So he goes for it, takes a huge whip. I give him a nice soft catch. It's great. And he was like, oh, that's awesome. And so he comes down, starts talking with the med students because, you know, he's a doctor, or he was in residency at the time. And they're like, oh, how long have you been climbing? And he was like, he's like, this is
6 hours.
He was like, this is my fourth. This is my fourth climb. And they were like, no, we mean like, you know, total. He was like, this is my first day. And one of them was like, you're leading on your first day? And my buddy Matt looks at me. He's like, Nate, what's leading? And so then I like had to explain to him that other people top rope. But the thing is, it's like I've seen so many times, and this is something that like I dealt with, is that you top rope forever, and then there's this huge buildup as if lead climbing is just this scary, terrifying thing.
Right.
And then people are just paralyzed by it.
Yeah.
Where it's like, if you just start that way using, you know, learning from someone who's safe, and you learn how to do it correctly, like it's not a big deal. Like it shouldn't be a big deal, but that is very much, I think, a generational thing.
Yeah, it totally is. And I mean, I think this, blurs the line between the people you have around and the era. Because if you're climbing around people of another era, they believe you should be taught in a certain way.
Yeah.
And not that that's a bad thing to climb around people of another era, but you have to be careful of being led down the wrong path by someone who just doesn't know any better, And those people were conditioned in the same way, by something in their environment. And it's totally true. I mean, when I started climbing, it was just common to go out and start leading. Like you didn't have to go through a million classes, and no one told you all the rules of leading, and you can't do this and you can't do that, and we just didn't know. You figure it out.
Yeah.
And I think that's a better way in a lot of ways. I mean, I definitely understand the gym's need to teach people the right ways because they have liability issues and all these things. But if you're going out with your friends and you're like, oh, you can't lead belay now because you haven't top rope belayed for 17 hours, then you're crazy. Just teach them how to lead belay and it's going to be fine.
Yeah. No, totally. I think another thing that the era that you came up with and how that affects you is what type of training was popular at the time.
Yeah, totally.
And I think like good, simple, straightforward training ideas have been around for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you look at like what good climbers have done for a long time, it's not that different from what we do now. But I think what has always caused problems is what gets popular.
Right.
So it's like, okay, like bodybuilding style or like a lot of aerobics, running, not running, doing yoga, like doing all sorts of like fitness training or, maybe, I think it was maybe like 7-8 years ago, I feel like hangboarding really got like hit its peak. Like suddenly, like it's not like anyone really knew totally what they were going to do with it, but they were just like, I need to be hangboarding.
Right.
Then it was like periodization, then not periodization, but really for a long time, like I feel like there has been smart training ideas that have been around, but it is very easy to get influenced by the popularity and the hype that's around you.
Yep. What do you think right now? Do you feel like there is a leaning toward one discipline or another? Like we were joking about before we started recording that your climbing is sort of dictated by Chris Sharma. Like, did you start climbing in the pre-Sharma era? Did you start climbing in the Sharma as a sport climber era, Sharma as a boulder era, or Sharma as a sport climber part 2 era? Or maybe it was Sharma DWS. So it's a lot of people's preferred style was dictated by Chris Sharma and his phase at the time. Do you think there is a preferred discipline right now, or is it
training
mixed? Oh boy, you might be right there.
I say that half jokingly, but I feel like right now training is very popular.
It really is.
And the thing is, it works. Like it definitely does.
I'm not going to say it shouldn't be popular.
Yeah. If done
we do
correctly.
make a living that way.
Yes. If done correctly at the right dosage, it works really well.
Was dosage a Chris Sharma pun?
At the right dosage for. It's done really well. But I mean, in all honesty, like I think that is, I don't know. I can't think of anything like it's tough to like try and look outside the bubble that is like everything I read is about training and stuff like that. And like, if someone comes up and wants to talk with me, most likely they want to talk with me about training. So like, this is obviously what I hear the most about, but I think we're kind of in a wave where that is what is popular. Mm-hmm. And even there was an interview with Alex Magos and Dickie Korb on, I cannot remember the podcast. It was a German podcast, but the podcaster, he was just like, so what's your take on the what the Americans are doing right now? It seems like they're really excited about their barbells. And he was very aggressively like poking fun. And Dickie Core was like, no, I think it's good. I think like, training, if done well, is a good thing. Like, we shouldn't be turning into power lifters. Like, but if you're doing it well, like it can be good.
Yeah.
But so if even like the outside European perspective is that we're now all turning into lifters who climb, not climbers who lift, then, maybe it is becoming a thing.
Yeah. I mean, I think it is kind of one of the things that sort of permeates all of the disciplines.
Aid.
Yeah, aid climbers don't really train, do they? Maybe they do. I don't know. Do people still aid climb? For God's sake.
I hope not.
Because I think now, and maybe it's just that there are more climbers in general, but it certainly seems like there are a lot more climbers who are totally open to doing all three, bouldering, trad, sport, and do them all regularly within a year. And that wasn't the case when I was coming up in climbing.
Totally.
People were sport climbers, or they were boulders, or they were trad climbers. You didn't really mix them up very often.
Yeah.
So yeah, you might be right. Training might be the popular style of the era right now.
There's sport, trad, bouldering, and training.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's actually an interesting point, that there are more people who are multidisciplinary, which I think has been great. Like, I think one of the greatest things to happen to sport climbers is bouldering. Like, consistent bouldering mixed in with sport climbing is amazing.
Yep. Well, I think that's true with trad climbers too. I mean, if you look at all of today's best trad climbers, they're all bouldering at a relatively high level, training in the gym, sport climbing at a relatively high level. They kind of do it all. So I think that's been extremely beneficial for rock climbing in general. It's this pervasiveness of bouldering.
Yeah, no, I totally agree.
Do you think that the training as a sort of a the popular trend of the era, does that break up by area where you're climbing? Are there zones where people don't train as much?
For sure. I think this is like coming from the Southeast, like people are getting more into training, but I feel like they're always a few steps behind from what people do in the West. Like in Colorado and further west, they're just, a little more obsessive with stuff like that.
Yeah.
And in the Southeast also, there's kind of this attitude that you shouldn't be trying too hard
against it.
Yeah. It's like, that's cool if you climb hard, but it's way cooler if you climb hard without trying to climb hard.
Yeah, totally.
It's kind of that weird thing. But
we're trying to change that over at Crux Conditioning with Paul Corsaro. So go see him if you don't mind the stigma that all the old school Southerners put on you.
Yeah. If you want to climb hard but don't mind trying, go to
Crux Conditioning.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think there are areas where it's different, and that's one of the other aspects of this product for your environment that we decided to talk about, is that area and the area style that you grow up in is going to make a huge difference in your climbing. And I rewatched recently Wind and Rattlesnakes, the film about the history of lander climbing.
Oh yeah, I've been meaning to rewatch that.
And there's a scene where Steve Bechtel is talking about BJ Tilden, and he says, BJ has developed his whole style around this area. And at first I was like, oh, he's totally right. And then I was like, I'm not sure he is. I think maybe the area has developed BJ's style, because there are monos on 510s here. Mm-hmm. There are tiny little crimps on 511s. There are huge moves on 510s and 511s.
Yeah.
So coming up through that style, his fingers have gotten really strong. He's gotten really strong at shallow monos. He's gotten really good at getting his feet high and making giant moves to precise pockets on starting on slabs and then going to vertical and lightly overhanging and then steep things, you know. So this area has really dictated what type of climber he's going to be. And, you know, in particular, BJ's done a great job of branching out, but his core style, another pun there.
I see what you did, yeah.
His core style is very much built by Wild Iris.
Yeah.
And I think that happens to a lot of climbers.
I completely agree. Yeah, what are some, you know, and it's funny too, because it's a style of both the area and the weather of the area. So for instance, you look at like people who live in the UK and where it rains all the time, because of the area that they live, like they're amazingly strong. Not the greatest rock climbers.
Right.
Like they send hard, but like they're just viciously strong because they just don't get to climb outside all that often.
Mm-hmm. They spend all their time in the cellars getting crazy, crazy strong.
Mm-hmm. And no sunlight.
And they're a little pale.
Yes.
No shade thrown. There's another pun.
Yeah.
I'm getting good at this.
Oh God, this is worse than my dad jokes. What are some other areas that you see? Ooh, I actually have a really good one. So one of my favorite climbing styles of all time is Drew Ruana. He's a younger climber, and he grew up climbing in Smith. And very much how BJ is has been formed by this area. Like you watch him, he is such a precise climber, and he can climb. And he climbed there when he was tiny, and it's big moves on bad small holds, precision.
Yep.
And he can climb so large and very precise. And it's cool to see. He's just got a really rad style, especially for someone his age.
Mm-hmm.
Normally you see people kind of teenagers, they lean more towards a gym style, a gymnastic, climbing gym style.
Right. But
he just moves really well, and it's cool to see.
Yeah, very deft with his feet, and just it exudes that he's a good, skilled climber rather than just a super strong climber.
Totally.
Which is what we see from a lot of younger climbers
mm-hmm.
who come up in the gyms. Yeah, totally. And I mean, since you used Drew Ruana, I'll use Drew Mack. I mean, Drew Mack is definitely a Red River climber. I mean, he can hang on forever and ever and ever, and knows that that's his wheelhouse, and that's because that's what you need to be able to do in the red. You don't need to be precise like Drew Ruana. You can just paste your foot anywhere on any of the 42 jugs that are nearby and just keep climbing, keep hanging on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's not to say Drew Mack's not a good rock climber, because he is, but that's just to say his style has been very much dictated by the style of the area.
Yes, totally. And this is something Dave McLeod used to talk about, how back in the day, this was before videos, if you wanted to see a great climber and you were from the UK, you needed to go to France and go watch these French climbers just swim their way up overhanging limestone, because the way they moved.
Legrand.
Yeah. The way these guys moved, because that was the way you just moved there, was just incredible.
Mm-hmm.
And having gotten to go into Seus last summer, it's cool. You can definitely tell the French climbers, they have just very much their own style.
Yeah.
And it's cool to see.
Yeah. And I think, we've talked a little bit about the weather and how the rock sort of determines, the style of climbing on the rock determines what type of climber you are. And there's also the availability of routes in your home area.
Oh yeah.
That really can dictate what type of climber you are, and what levels you're able to reach. I was listening to the Ledge podcast with Alex Magos one day, hiking up to Wild Iris, and he commented, and I had to stop and rewind it because I couldn't believe what I'd heard. But he said that they were talking about a list at the Frankenjura that's the top 100 list, the 100 hardest routes in the Frankenjura, And he mentions that everything on that list is 8C or harder, which is 14B. And that blew me away. Coming up in the Red River Gorge, when I got to 13C, there were 5,
Yeah.
and there were maybe only 8 routes harder than that, something like that. So to have 100 routes at 14B and harder at your disposal for you to be able to test out and try and find the ones that fit you so that you can get stronger, to try the ones that don't fit you, to move on to the next grade, that's huge in your development as a climber. So I think that's a massive advantage.
Oh, I completely agree. I mean, that's one of the reasons I think why so many European sport climbers they just outstrip the Americans, is because they go to so many areas, like they learn from so many areas and they have access to so many routes. Like I think Andra, whenever he was, I don't know, something really young, but still wildly strong, like 12, he like dedicated a year more or less to just on-sighting.
Right.
And he could do that because he had just thousands of routes at his fingertips.
Right.
Which is rad. Like I think there's a huge advantage to that. And
I mean, while it's a huge advantage to you as a beginner climber to live in the Red River Gorge, it's not a huge advantage when you're a 13 plus climber. You just don't have that much to choose from, but if you're looking to climb 512, the Red River Gorge is a fucking amazing place to be.
Almost endless.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it just goes without saying that the two best sport climbers on the planet right now are guys who are from areas where there are thousands and thousands of hard routes to try.
Yeah. No, totally. And I think even saying area also, kind of two more things on it, and these are joined together. And one is, how easy is it for you to travel to different areas, like to different styles?
Right.
So if you're somewhere where you can climb on sandstone, granite, limestone, like nice, all within a few hour drive, like you can develop a lot of skills and like really round yourself out much better than, if you only have like southern sandstone or something like that.
Yep, absolutely.
But also an area can also shape you in that. And we see this with people who live out west where the weather's always good. They just climb outside all the time and never take the time to like actually train, which some people can get really strong and very good with climbing just outside. And for some people, it just doesn't work as well for them. And so maybe the best thing would be, instead of just going outside just because you can year round, like on the days when it's in the 90s, like maybe you should actually train.
Yeah. I work with quite a few people who are in that situation where they want to be climbing outside all the time. And it's kind of a constant struggle to say, well, can we dedicate a block of time to flipping the ratio to more indoor time, less outdoor time? We don't have to stop climbing outside, but let's flip the ratio and cherry pick the days outside instead of hoping for a good day in the middle of the summer when it's the worst conditions.
Yeah.
Yep, totally true. Let's talk about the last one, and then I think we both probably have some questions about this. But it doesn't just come down to the area, the outside, the people. I mean, since the advent of gyms have been very different.
Totally.
And being from Cincinnati, which actually was one of the earlier areas to have several gyms, the two gyms that we had were radically different from each other. Climb Time started as like a 20-foot top rope walls. We had one really steep, almost a roof lead wall, and we had a giant 45. And a couple of other small bouldering walls at the time. And then it's since expanded its bouldering options, turned the lead wall into a bouldering wall, and still has the top rope walls that essentially have just become bouldering walls. You know, most everything ends halfway up. So it's a really amazing bouldering gym. And then we had RockQuest, which had some of the first like big steep walls, had a huge roof out the ceiling. You know, so when it was built, it was this pretty state-of-the-art sport climbing gym. And you can tell the difference between the people who climb mostly at RockQuest and the people who climb mostly at Climb Time. They're radically different climbers. The people from Climb Time can do huge moves. They can grab much smaller holds, and they fall off about 12 feet up all the time. And the people from RockQuest can't do the hard moves at all, but can climb forever and ever. I mean, that's totally a gross generalization, but it's pretty easy to see the difference between the two.
Yeah. No, and I mean, I think that happens everywhere. Like most cities or towns have, I mean, a lot of places have multiple gyms now, which is kind of crazy. But like, it's very common to have like a training gym and then like, you know, the more flashy gym.
Yep, totally.
And yeah, I mean, when I was in Houston, I went to one of the newer gyms, and it was absolutely beautiful. Like, it was amazing. I mean, literally everything you could imagine. But at the same time, it was like, you know, most of the people there were like on their phone, like texting on their phone, like playing on their phones, doing stuff like that. Like the type of setting was not maybe conducive for people who want to prepare to climb outside.
Right.
And things like that. So while it was like beautiful and a ton of fun and like I had a blast, like, you know, if I wanted to prepare to go climb hard, like that's not where I'm going to go. But, you know, for a lot of people, that's not like going to different gyms isn't an option.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that's a big thing that you need to really pay attention to is what are you preparing for, and is your gym, are the people you climb with, are these things that you're doing preparing you for whatever your goals are. Let's talk a little bit about
get rid of your friends.
Get rid of all of your friends.
Fire them. You can do that.
Let's talk a little about like how to sidestep, how to avoid the pitfalls that your environment might be kind of putting right there in your way. So let's start with the gym pitfall that we're just talking about. What are the ways you can avoid becoming very steeped, there's another pun, in your gym style?
I'm just going to pretend I didn't hear that. Man. Trying to climb with different people. So like change what nights you go if you can. I'm a big fan of both climbing alone and with people. I think it's really important to do both. Like a lot of people, I've noticed this trend with a lot of people who who are really psyched on training also end up being the people who like train alone a lot, or they climb alone a lot.
Yep.
And you know, it's definitely not like a hard and fast rule, but it's fairly common. And I think that can be a real shortcoming.
Yep.
Like I can't say how often enough when I talk with people, they're like, hey, I'm stuck in a plateau. One of my first questions is, when you're in the gym, who do you climb with? And they'll be like, oh, you know, I climb with, you know, my boyfriend or my girlfriend or whatever, and I'm stronger than them. And then maybe that's about it. If there's someone else like trying the same problem I'm already trying, I'll climb with them, but otherwise no one. And it's like they never have someone like right next to them pushing them, and like when they're like, I don't want to try that thing, like it, you know, secretly it's like they don't want to try a boulder because it's going to be hard for them. And instead of having that other person who's just like, hey, we need to go get on that, like you need to go get on that, like they can just kind of go get on something else.
Yep.
They're like, I'll just go to the hang board because I could always use stronger hands.
Right. One of the things I like the most about climbing with other people is just making up boulders too.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's been a ton of fun these last few days climbing with you in the machine shop.
Because you're going to make up things that I wouldn't think to make up, and I'm going to make up things you wouldn't make up.
Yeah, and I like climbing on things that I think are stupid. They make me better, so I love climbing with you. It's great. Like, you make up a lot of good stupid boulders.
Come on now.
And then
All
we
my
had
boulders are classics.
Yes, and the machine shop.
They're classics, man. Come on now.
But it's been great because it's like very much so the things that you make up, like I would never even see or notice.
Right.
And then I think vice versa for the most part.
Totally. Yeah. So I think that's really important way to break out of your style if you're in the gym, sort of being dictated to by the setting style of the gym, is make shit up and have your friends make shit up and play around, make up silly things, you know, and do ludicrous things. That's huge. Area style. How do you sidestep getting trapped in that? I mean, we've seen people do it, right? There are people like Michaela Kirsch, who is a Red River climber, but can go out and do things like Necessary Evil. Mm-hmm. And I mean, that's really fucking impressive. And it's because I think because she also does what you mentioned. Let's spend some time in the gym training really hard, training the things that aren't what we get in our area.
Yeah. She's a really strong boulder.
Yeah.
Like, having bouldered around her just a little bit, like, I've always been really impressed with how well she boulders. Which, yeah, as a Red River climber, the trap a lot of people fall into, Rachel Melville, is that they just want to keep getting more and more endurance.
Shots fired.
Yes. She knows I love her. Go bouldering is what I'm trying to say. If you're living in the red, you don't need more endurance because that's what you already do.
Right.
Like, instead, you should be bouldering in your other time because you don't need more fitness. You've already got it from where you climb.
Yeah, I fell into the trap. I mean, you know, I was trying to train specifically for the red, so I was just getting more and more and more pumped.
Yeah, and you got to the point where you could shake on almost anything.
Right.
Until you couldn't, and what you couldn't, you were falling on.
Right, yeah. If I could pull on it, I could shake on it.
Yes.
That's pretty much what it came down to.
Yeah.
So I think, I think something like what Michaela does is really smart. Travel, go bouldering, climb on other types of rock,
Makes up
try hard things on those other types of rock, get frustrated, you know,
and even where you live,
and train a shit ton.
Yes.
If you have to.
Yeah. If you have to, like, that's what you should do. But even, like, depending on where you live, like, you can climb other styles. You know, like, if you're in the red.
Totally.
Some of my favorite routes in the red are really hard little boulder routes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, those are, I think, some of the absolute best.
And really amazing vert routes. Swahili slang.
Yeah. No, there's some great technical routes. I was just, when we were making that list with Drew Mack, I was super proud of him that he put No Redemption on the list.
Yeah, totally, man.
Nice technical route.
Drew's list was good. It was a variety, which a lot of people skip over in the red.
Yeah, because you can get suckered into just climbing on the Undertow or Madness Cave or, basically just the entire Mother Lode, which is great climbing, but it is one niche style.
Yep, and it can be vice versa. I mean, I'm not going to call you out here, Lee Smith, because you've definitely switched things up, and I'm really impressed by that. But it used to be that Lee and, there are lots of other people like this who they deemed themselves not very good at the steep routes. They weren't inspired by the steep routes, so they spend all their time doing the few but really good vertical routes that the red has to offer.
I hear the best way to get better at something is to avoid it.
It's totally true.
Yeah.
I mean, especially if you're willing to just make up that you did cool things. That's what I would do. Not Lee never did that. That's what I would do, though. I would just make some shit up and then never have to actually get good at it. People you climb with, we already answered this one. You just get new friends, for God's sake.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Leave your friends. They're slowing you down. But for real, this is actually like kind of a tough one and topic of a future episode.
Yes.
That we'll be doing. But, sometimes like there are people that are amazing to hang out with. Maybe they're even great to boulder with, but you don't need to go sport climbing with them. Like they're just a drag. They want to do 2 pitches, call it a day. They're scared. They're, whatever. They don't want to try hard. They're not motivating you to try hard. And like they can be awesome people to go out and get dinner with or like hang out with. But maybe if your goal is to climb harder, like maybe like make a separation, be like, hey, like let's go out in a group of 4. Like you can find you can have another person to climb with who like wants to be on your same plan of like hammocks and snacks.
Yep.
And I'll climb with someone else who wants to like try hard.
Yeah, totally. Just don't put your damn hammock across the trail.
Yeah, don't do hammocks.
Yeah, you can bring it to the crag if you just hide in the woods where no one can see you.
Yeah.
No, I agree. And, I talked a little bit about this in the episode with Scott and Tyler about being good partners, that sometimes you just have to go looking for people that are better for your rock climbing and cultivate those relationships instead of just accepting that what you have is what you got. And that can be really fucking tough to do, but I think sometimes it's just necessary.
Yeah. Yeah, no, totally. Like I look at my best seasons, especially of sport climbing, and it's always been when I've had like my best climbing partners. Like as far as the people who motivated me the most, the people that just like we like could draw off each other's energy. And it was like those same seasons were also their best seasons as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it has to be, they have to have similar goals to you at that time. It doesn't have to be you're both working on the same route or even that you're both working on the same grades.
Totally.
But you just have to have similar goals in terms of you want to put a similar amount of dedication into your goal and they coordinate with each other. You and I haven't climbed outside a ton together largely because since we've been working together with the power company, I've been almost exclusively focused on the business. So I haven't been, and I know that I haven't been able to be a good outdoor climbing partner, and that's just something I have to sacrifice right now. I do want to get back to that, and I look forward to being able to spend next winter in Waco and climbing together more, or in the Red or wherever we end up climbing together more outside, because I know that I haven't been able to be a good partner to this point because I'm always distracted by something work related, you know. And I think that's important to know. I think if era is your problem, then you're just screwed. You should just give it up.
By it, you mean your pride?
Yeah, pride and climbing in general.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, I think, I think you just have to have an open mind. Just look around, and rock climbing is really fun in lots and lots of different ways. So just try to let go of these ridiculous beliefs that you've held on to because of whatever era you came up in, and realize that things are changing and they're going to change with or without you. So if you want to be angry and, always just frustrated at the way the world is, then you're welcome to do that. But if you want to have fun rock climbing and you want to get better at rock climbing, then maybe accept that change is needed.
Yeah. Have you had any favorite moments where someone of a newer generation than you like kind of motivated you or inspired you?
Yeah, I've talked about this one on the podcast before.
Was this when I broke the banana?
No, but I actually just told that story again the other day. No, and this is kind of a gym thing in that, and a fixed mindset thing to some degree, where I was able to, there was this V8 or something in the gym on the 60, and I was able to do it without this huge dyno that was intended. I was just able to do the move in a fairly comfortable way. I didn't understand why you had to do this big dyno. But then I saw this younger kid just do the dyno. And I was like, holy shit, I can't do that, you know? And of course, my ego is immediately like, well, that's stupid, you know? He would never do that 90 feet up if he's pumped, you know, but I would do it my way. But instead, I sort of forced myself to try it. And when I realized I wasn't even sure how to do it, I just asked him, like, hey, will you do that again? Like, I think it's cool. And I watched him do it again. And then in 4 or 5 tries, I was able to do it his way. You know, he was never able to do it my way, though. No, but that, you know, and that's happened a lot of times where I've watched the way younger climbers who are really, really stoked or really bouncy or whatever, they just have different attributes than me, whatever they are, that I've watched them and gotten really inspired to climb more or climb harder or climb different or whatever. It happens all the time.
Nice. That's awesome.
How about you?
Yes, actually.
You are one of the younger climbers, actually.
Ironically, well, it's funny because like I have to go back in because you practice being so like snappy and bouncy all the time because you're trying to get out of sloth mode.
Yeah, I think I'm out of it.
I know you were saying that today. I think you're. Well, here's what's funny is
Damn near out of it.
because like I forever like one of the biggest breakthroughs for me was learning how to do what I later like started referring to as rooting, like and what we turned into like the applied body tension like entire process. And so that's like how I love to climb. Like for me, it's like I want to get as extended as possible, like on a steep wall, because that's like for me that's such a fun form of mastery.
Right.
And so we were just in the gym the other day, and you know, you had that little crimp problem where like everyone was just jumping to a hold, and even like people who were like a bit taller than us. And I was just like, okay, I'm going to do this keeping my foot on. Because in my mind, that's like step one is like, how do I do this? Like do the big move, keeping the feet. And so I did it that way. And then afterwards I was like, man, but this is going to be harder for me just to like jump to the edge. So then it ended up taking me like twice as long to do it that way.
Right.
So it's funny that I actually like have to remind myself to like revert back. And it's even funnier that you're the one that reminds me that I need to be like more springy sometimes.
That is pretty funny.
Like, yeah. So like, that's definitely one example of kind of the opposite, but one for sure, years ago, I was watching a youth comp in person, and there's a girl from Stone Summit who she was on lead, and just watching her climb, she just committed to every move 100%. Didn't matter if it was a jump, didn't matter if it was horrible feet, if everything looked awful. She was just like, even if she was like pumped and falling apart, like it never showed. And she was just committing so well. And it was cool because it like looking at that, I was like, I don't do that. Like I know for a fact, not on my best day do I do that.
Yeah.
But I can also recognize that like if I can teach myself how to do that, like tomorrow I would climb a letter grade harder.
Yeah.
Unquestionably.
You totally just reminded me of another young climber that I'm continually inspired by. Is it continually or continuously? Could it be both?
Yes. I don't know. I'm not the English guy.
Well, I'm always inspired by this person.
I'm continued to be.
And that's Carrie Scott.
Oh yeah.
I mean, since we met her in the gym at Triangle Rock Club, I didn't expect to see her climb as well as she climbed.
Oh, I totally remember because she was forerunning, because she was one of the coaches and there was the kids comp. She was forerunning one of the problems, and we were standing next to each other, and she like went up, and I like leaned next to you. I was like, she's climbing really hard. Like, I mean, yeah.
Yeah, she's super strong and a really good climber, and I didn't expect to see it. And I was surprised by it. And it wasn't that I didn't expect to see it because she was a girl or anything else. It was just because a lot of climbing coaches end up becoming coaches before they become good climbers, and they never get around to becoming good climbers because they're trying to be good coaches. And that's totally fine. But it's the majority, I would say. And that's what I expected to see. And that didn't happen. And then after she did Proper Soul, which we talked about on the podcast, she didn't stop there, and she didn't just keep reaching for the next higher grade. She also went back and did things like The Racist, which
Super proud. First female ascent,
which I think might be the proudest ascent I know of that she's done. I mean,
I don't know. She did Coltrane, which
Coltrane is badass, but
I think Mego said is like top 5 in the world.
But The Racist has these massive moves that
I'm familiar.
A lot of people would have told her you can't do it.
Yeah. No, I remember when I first moved to the new, people straight up told me, they're like, no, it doesn't go. Like, for your size, like, and she's, I mean, maybe only a half inch or an inch taller than me, I think.
Yeah. And just the fact that she's extra ultra positive, always smiling, and just a super cool human.
Yeah.
You know, I think if I had to pick a young climber today that I was most inspired by, it'd probably be her. Yeah.
Nice.
So I think that's about all we got here, and we got another podcast to do.
Yep.
So we need to wrap this thing up. And you guys already know where to find us, powercompanyclimbing.com, at Power Company Climbing on the Instagrams, on the Facebooks, and on the Pinterest machine. You can look for us on Twitter, but you know the deal. We don't tweet. We scream like eagles.
This time,